That is the epiphany. Again, from the experience side, it was mind-blowingly good. And then I knew, from the engineering side, looking at through that robotics lens, I was like, hey, we can automate this. We can make a computer do this even better than a person can. And we can also, from that product standpoint, we can take that person in the meeting out from, being the director and the producer of that video call to actually being engaged in the meeting and participating themselves. And so it all kind of came together, this concept that, hey, this is a real problem. And there's a way to solve this at a price point that is affordable and a package that is nice and consumer-like, approachable, and with that robotics and AI that would allow it to be so well automated that you wouldn't need an IT department to support it.
Most of us running hybrid meetings are not great at media production, and a poorly placed computer can render a meeting difficult to follow for remote team members. Enter Mark Schnittman, the co-founder and CTO of Owl Labs. Today, he chats about the eureka moment he had that led to the eventual creation of a product, the Meeting Owl, that helps capture great video and sound. Enjoy this episode. IT Visionaries is brought to you by Salesforce Platform. If you love the thought leadership on this podcast, Salesforce has even more meaty IT thoughts to chew on. Take your company to the next level with in-depth research and trends right in your inbox. Subscribe to a newsletter tailored to your role today at salesforce.com/newsletter. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of IT Visionaries, and today we have a special guest. He is the CTO of a company called Owl Labs. Mark Schnittman, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks. It's great to be here.
All right, right out the gate, I was checking out the website. Your company seems aptly named. The product does look like an owl, but for those who don't know who you are, tell us, what is Owl Labs and what does it do?
Sure. So let me tell you a little bit first about the company. We are a Series B startup. We're about 150 people in size. We're headquartered in the Boston area. We actually have 2 offices, but we are a hybrid company. We are currently getting close to 50% within the Boston area and 50% distributed around the country and to some extent around the world as well. Going back a little bit in our history, we actually, started the company with my co-founder, Max McKeeve, and it was just me and him in my kitchen. Then we hired our first employee on the other side of the country, so we were 33% remote. And that trend continued really smoothly up into the start of the pandemic. We hovered around 40% plus or minus throughout all of those years, not through any intentional maneuver. It was just that we were willing to hire people wherever they were, as long as they could do the job. And so once the pandemic started, things, as you can see in our stats, got a little bit more distributed. Now we're about 50-50. But that's what we are. And our mission is to make hybrid meetings for hybrid companies as natural and as effective as in-person meetings. And we do that by building hardware and software.
All right, so that's the key here. We are a hardware company. And for those of you that have never been to Owl Labs website or not familiar with the product, I'm going to describe it my way. And then, of course, Mark, we definitely want to hear yours. So Mark just said it's a hardware and software component, but it looks like it's a very special camera. It's cylindrical, almost like an Amazon Alexa. It does illuminate, and the illuminations make it look like an owl. I'll have to ask you about that in just a moment. And it looks like it's powered by specific software. Now, the brand prop or the value prop that it says that makes it different than, like, right now I'm using, for example, a Logitech camera that's just mounted on my computer, is that it can provide a 360-degree view, which seems pretty interesting. But I'd love for you to dive into, like, what is the camera? How does it work? What's unique about it? And then, of course, I'll definitely want to know how you guys came up with this idea.
Well, I'm going to actually start at the end of your question then, if it's all right with you, and
Yeah, that's fine.
start with the origin. So the origin starts really in 2012 when I left the job I was at, which was at iRobot Corporation. I was a roboticist.
iRobot makes the Roomba. The iRobot. If you guys don't know iRobots, the Roomba is the remote. It's not even remote. It's automatic, I guess. I used to have one, but it's very erratic. That's what it's known for more than anything. It's like a very erratic vacuum cleaner that it like seems to have a very erratic pattern. Yeah, it's pretty wild, but it does a great job. I mean, we didn't have any complaints about it.
Well, I'll give a quick shout out and a plug for iRobot because I still have a lot of love. Back in the model that you had, it would do something called random bounce, which is a whole interesting thing about that being the most effective way to cover space when you don't actually have a map or know where you are. But
Yeah.
fast forward to modern times, Roombas now map the area, localize themselves on it, and clean in a back and forth pattern. So you should check out a new one. I think you'd be quite happy.
Oh, okay.
All right, but getting back to the Owl Lab story, which I mean, there's a lot of origin in
Yeah.
the iRobot story. It's where I grew up as a roboticist, which feeds into a lot of how the owl was born and how it operates. But in 2012, I decided to leave iRobot and join a startup that was located on the West Coast. And this was a really tough decision because I could not leave Boston. I had a lot of
Hmm.
things keeping me here that just prevented me from making that move out west. But I really liked the people. I really liked the company. They were very excited about me as well. And so they decided to make me an offer that I could work remotely. And let me tell you, in 2012, that seemed insane to me. And like, I really wanted to do this. I wanted the job, but I was looking at it, I was like, listen, you can work across 3,000 miles for a month, 2 months, maybe 3 months. But like, I want a long term commitment here. I really, when I'm in something, I'm in something. And so basically, what happened was I decided to take the plunge. I decided to sort of put everything to the side and just like, yeah, let's just give it a try. And the long story short is that I was there for 2 years and I found out that remote work actually could work. I found out that video conferencing finally was real, even in 2012 with I don't remember what Google called it at that time. It wasn't Hangouts.
I think WebEx was probably the biggest one. We used
It,
WebEx. I'm thinking back to 2012. WebEx was everywhere.
yeah, but we were just a tiny little startup pre-Series A when I first met them, and so we were on the Google system using whatever Google gave you as part of that Google Apps for Business. I think they called the suite, and it actually worked. One on one, you could have good conversations with people, and I discovered that working remotely also worked, even though we were working on a hardware product there. It was a small consumer robot. And all this worked, but the one thing that didn't work was the group meetings. So one on one, I was totally fine. But if I was in a meeting for a software stand up or an all hands meeting or all the other meetings in between that had multiple people on the West Coast, I was completely cut off. I do remember this one time, it was an all hands meeting, and I spent the whole 45 minutes looking at the CEO's stomach because he had the computer open that was hosting the call was in front of him on a coffee table. It was a startup hip. He was sitting on a couch and the screen was tilted at such an angle that it was just like looking at his stomach. Fortunately, he was an ex professional rock climber, so he was in great shape. That's real nice. But like I was completely cut off from everything that was going on in that meeting. I couldn't follow it when other people talked. I couldn't really hear them. I couldn't really figure out when to interject because I don't see any of the body language. This was just kind of standard issue for that position and for remote working at that time. And we tried all sorts of solutions. We bought everything we could get our hands on to improve that experience, and nothing really worked. And one day, the magic moment happened, which is going all the way in reverse, the most low tech solution possible. I was at a software stand up meeting sitting in Boston. In San Francisco, there was a computer, a MacBook computer, sitting on a stool in the middle of the circle of software engineers. And it was a swivel stool. So one of my coworkers decided on this day, for some reason unknown to everybody, that he was just going to like swivel that stool top around and point the computer's camera and microphone at each person as they spoke. And my head exploded back in Boston. Like after everything we had tried, this was like by far the best experience. It was unbelievable.
So this, like, for those who are watching the YouTube video, you'll see this, but on the podcast, I mean, I'm swiveling a chair. Like literally, so like obviously you can't see the bottom, but you're saying they put the laptop on the chair, and that's what they were doing. They were turning it to whoever was talking, and
That's right.
that's where the epiphany came from.
That is the epiphany. Again, from the experience side, it was mind-blowingly good. And then I knew, from the engineering side, looking at through that robotics lens, I was like, hey, we can automate this. We can make a computer do this even better than a person can. And we can also, from that product standpoint, we can take that person in the meeting out from, being the director and the producer of that video call to actually being engaged in the meeting and participating themselves. And so it all kind of came together, this concept that, hey, this is a real problem. And there's a way to solve this at a price point that is affordable and a package that is nice and consumer like, approachable, and with that robotics and AI that would allow it to be so well automated that you wouldn't need an IT department to support it. And then that combined with my own personal experience, again, this was now 2014, but having that experience of 2 years of really believing that in the future remote work is going to be common and it's going to be successful. So you put that all together. I grabbed Max McKeeve. He was still at iRobot. That's where I know him from. We went out for a beer, and he was foolish enough to agree that we should try and start a company around this idea.
So right then and there, you have a problem, you see a viable solution. Obviously the product's changed quite a bit since then. So Max says, "Hey, I want to do this with you, Mark. Well, let's do it. Let's do it." So what was the first? I guess so. Now you're agreed. We're gonna get going. So I guess next step,
Well,
prototyping.
next step is being naive and not knowing what we're doing. So this is
Oh.
a fun little tip for other people maybe going into this. We looked at it and we're like, hey, look, we're not just a couple of kids out of college. We have some years of experience doing engineering and product development. iRobot was is a pretty good name, pretty cool product, all this great stuff. People, investors should believe that we can build this thing. We just need the funding so that we can get started. And so we put together the pitch deck, we put together a little faked up demo video, and we went out and, not knowing anything about how you even fundraise, how you even meet people, because we're not in San Francisco, we're not in Silicon Valley, we're in Boston, and it's a little bit of a different scene. And so we spent a whole bunch of months going out there trying to tell people, hey, look at this nice slide deck and this video. We can make this thing, give us millions of dollars. And what we found out was nobody was going to do that. We needed to build that first really, really crappy prototype and put it down in front of them to give them a little flavor of what that future product would be and what the company would be formed around, and also to prove to them that we could actually do it. We weren't just talking. So that was the first step. Second, not quite the second step, but to answer your question from the beginning about, hey, where did this? I can see where the owl name come from. How'd that happen? That's kind of funny story, which was that this was like before we had built anything. This was back in those pitch deck days. We're like, hey, well, we need a name for our company to put on these slides. And we spent just what seemed like too much time sitting around my kitchen, throwing out names for ideas. One of them that didn't stick, thank God, was Hubbub. I remember that as our idea for the company name. And I remember we took a walk and we're just like talking about, trying to brainstorm and then thinking like, what are we doing? We are wasting so much time trying to pick a name. And we need to get funding. We need to build this thing. We need to build the product. We need to build a company. Anyway, long story short, somewhere along the lines, and I don't know if it was Max or myself who thought of it, neither of us remember, which is really quite wonderful, I think, actually, and describes our relationship very well. Very, very lack of ego. Don't know who came up with it, but one of us suggested owl because owls can turn their heads all the way around. They
Yep.
have great vision, they have great hearing, and they're really wise. And so we went with it. And it turns out, like all these years later, it was a really good call. And, everything around the branding, the look and the feel of the product, it all came together around that owl name. So it turns out that was really good time spent back then. But at the time, we definitely were like, are we just like procrastinating and avoiding the things we should really be working on?
Yeah, I'm trying. When you said that, I was thinking of the other animals that could possibly see a lot of things, like maybe chameleon, because it's
Yeah. Yep,
that's
yep.
good.
Chameleon, a little long, maybe. Yeah, truthfully, and then we got the labs because we knew that we would never, especially back then, be able to get owl.com,
Yeah.
and then it'd be hard to trademark and do other things like that. That was where having a little experience, out in the world as a professional was helpful. So we added that labs to it to round it out and make it a little bit more unique. And then also getting back to that early question you asked about, and then the product, like it's got these eyes that turn on when the camera is streaming video to let you know that it's alive and active. And how did we get there? And that's a great story. We worked with a designer named Chris Lowe, who's an industrial designer out in California. I cannot say enough good about this guy. He's just absolutely fantastic. And we met with him, over the course of many weeks, and he told them what we wanted, what our company was about, what the product was about, what the feel of the company was, And he went off and he sketched up a few ideas and he brought back to us some renderings. And he started with the first one. I think it was just a cylinder. It looked like an Alexa. And we were
Mhm.
like, oh my God, like, what have we done? Who is this guy? Then he moved on to the next one, which was in the shape of an hourglass. And it was very, very clever. It was hourglass shaped, and the profile of the hourglass looked, if you looked at the negative space, it looked like two faces looking at each other.
Yep, yep.
People have
I've
probably
seen that
seen that.
illusion. Yeah.
Yeah, so he built that into a physical product, and it was like, wow, that is really clever, but the thing looks like a candelabra. And
Yeah.
again, like he's going through each of these third, he gets to a third design. It's just like, oh my God, what have we done? Who is this guy? And then he gets to the fourth one, and he flips it over, and it's the shape of the owl that you see on the website. And then he hits the next button on the presentation, and those eyes pop in. And he knew what he was doing. He knew that we were going to fall in love with that fourth option, and we did. Like immediately, we were like this is amazing. Then, of course, we left the meeting and we said, "Is this thing going to be too cute? Are people not going to want to put this in their office because it's got these these eyes, this personality?" And we spent a lot of time, chewing that over, interviewing people where we could, just thinking about it. In the end, we decided, look, we're going to own this thing. We are Owl Labs. This is the meeting owl. And it's time for office equipment to stop looking, like cold, hard,
Yep.
spaceship-like products that are intimidating and that people are afraid to use. And so we went for it, and it's turned out really well. People love the eyes. People love the personality.
Yeah, yeah. Talk a little bit about the technical challenges that came to making this come to life because at the time, I mean, even actually right now when I think about it, like 3D cameras or 360-degree cameras, there's got to be some type of rendering, you got to be speed, it's got to have some type of directional sensor that can tell who's actually talking. I'm assuming that's the whole point of the product is going to turn to the person talking because I'm picturing that time frame, right? That 2014, 2015, 16 time frame of meetings. Even if you were at a big company and you had a conference meeting, it was typically a centrally mounted camera, typically to the front center of the room. It couldn't capture the peripherals very well, and it really couldn't capture the back. Like everyone in the back looked like a dot. You know what I mean? Like every
Yeah.
single time. And the microphones of these rooms were always centrally located. They were supposed to have mini mics. Like you saw those tables that would have
Hmm.
mini mics at like every 3 seats or something like that. But then those didn't work. They seemed to not work because you could hear one person but not another, and it was never clear if they could hear you. So there's a lot of like logistical, spatial challenges you're really trying to solve here with, like you said, with hardware and software. How did you two go about saying, okay, this is how we're going to put this thing together? Because you got the cool shape. That's a killer design. I love it. But it still has to
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
So that's the big
It still has to work.
thing.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, everything about the engineering of it was incredibly difficult, and that's why, when we set out at the very beginning, we didn't really have a way to build a quick prototype to show people, hey, look, here it is, because it was so new, it was so different and so challenging. But let me tell you a little bit. I will back up a little bit and tell you a little bit more about what the owl is, what its value proposition is.
Yeah.
So it is, you described it really well. It is a three-in-one camera, speaker, and microphone, all 360 degrees in a very simple package. So it only has two ports on it. One is to provide it AC power so that it can run itself and have enough power to make a nice loud sound for the people in the room. And the other is a USB cable. And you take that USB cable, you plug it in from the owl to your host computer that's going to be running the call. And what's beautiful about the system is that USB interface is truly, the U is for universal, and it is universal. To the computer, the owl looks just like a dumb web camera from 20 years ago, because all of the magic happens within the owl itself. And that's really powerful because it means you don't need to install any drivers on your computer. You don't need to do any setup. Every computer, every operating system has a driver that comes with it that knows how to use a simple web camera. But of course, the owl is anything but simple. It's simple to use, but in terms of what it does, it's incredibly complex. So you plop it on the table. Generally, it goes towards the middle of the table, maybe a little bit biased towards the side where the TV is to help with your eye contact. But really, what's beautiful about it is you can put it down anywhere you want in any environment, and that's where all that robotics and AI comes in. So you plop it down there, and it's got these sensors on it, two powerful sensors. One is an 8 microphone array that's around the circumference of the owl that lets it hear in all directions at the same time and also pick up sound really well when folks speak, no matter where they are. And then you've got that camera that's also 360 degrees. So unlike my friend in San Francisco had to rotate the computer's camera with a narrow field of view to point at the right person at the right time, the owl can actually see and hear everyone in full 360 at all times. So then what it does is it uses its processing power and all those algorithms to create a model of the room. So it fuses together audio data coming in from those microphones that can help localize what direction is sound coming from. But if you just triggered off sound alone, somebody puts down their coffee mug or opens a bag of chips, and it's
Yeah.
gonna,
Too
it's
many
gonna be
false,
popping at
too
them.
many false positives. It would just be like erratic. Just
Yeah, totally erratic. And that is how, cameras from the olden days, maybe the 90s, maybe the early 2000s, there were cameras that would swivel themselves around like that and move mechanically. But just like you said, erratic, very distracting for people on both sides of the call when it's making mistakes, all that jazz. Okay, so what do? We take that camera that's got this beautiful 360-degree view of the room, and we use a lot of computer vision to look for features that will tell us, hey, this is what the room looks like. This is where the people are. This is and combined with that audio data, we can make a model of the room. So now the owl's got this idea of what's going on in the room, where things are, and when people have their conversation, it's able to, switch, snap between different people at different times. But again, unlike my friend rotating that computer, the owl can look in any two directions at a time that it wants to. It can even look in any three directions. And so we have it, the standard view is the top of the display has got a panoramic strip that shows the full 360 degrees of the room. So that gives everybody in the call the context of who's in the room. You'll never be surprised that somebody was there that you didn't know about. You'll never say that thing about your boss you didn't mean to say. And then down on the bottom portion, the bottom, 80% of the screen, we call that the stage. And that's where we dynamically show you what's going on in the meeting. Basically, as people start talking, we slide them into that stage area. And again, the nice thing is we can look in multiple directions at the same time. So in order to provide context and body language, we try to keep as many people on that stage as we have real estate on the screen. So we'll put three people side by side, kind of like you might see pundits on CNN or something like that.
okay. So I want to describe because I'm watching the video as you were talking. It's literally to about left of me, and I want to describe this for our audience so they can understand this. And then please, Mark, slap
Mm.
me, correct me if I'm wrong. So this camera is constantly basically 360 degrees. There's cameras pointed at everybody. It's not actually moving. Like when I first saw the thing, I thought it was moving. It's not moving. It's capturing everything at the same time. But the software is almost like a producer's box, the producer's box inside of like a live broadcast. Like it's choosing which screens to display, which cameras to display, which microphones to deliver in the presentation, so that you as a viewer of this programming, you're seeing the best views. You're always seeing the person who's talking. It's not moving. There's no motion sickness. Like the things aren't moving around all the time. You're just, hey, like you said, the slide effect. Hey, this person's now talking. They slide. They take the stage, and then you always get that 360 to strip. That's how this thing is working. It's using software to say which of these 8 cameras to show versus what I originally thought because of the swivel chair. I think as my mind was there. I was thinking that this camera is like constantly like like the eyes in the Squid Games. Like it was constantly doing that
Yeah.
kind of deal.
No, no. So your intuition is strong and your description is spot on. So it is a camera with no moving parts. That's because we don't want to, two reasons, and you hit on them. One, we don't want to distract the people in the room with something that's moving because, humans are very well tuned to pay attention to motion for our survival. And likewise, we don't want to have motion blur. So if you have a camera that's panning around,
Yep.
you're going to have motion blur, you're going to make people sick. And then, of course, that last bit, being able to see in all directions, lets us show multiple directions at the same time. This is all very important, again, for the feel that the product gives the people that are on the remote side of the call. It makes them feel like they're in the middle of the meeting, not that they're watching the meeting. And why is that? Well, it's just something you mentioned before. The traditional setup puts a camera above the TV or below the TV looking down the room. So its
Yeah.
view looks like a bowling alley. And the people watching the call, they are literally watching the meeting from the wall. they are watching it happen. It's like watching the crappiest sitcom ever about a boring meeting. And you take the meeting owl perspective, we put that in the middle of the table. So now your perspective as a remote user is you're sitting in the middle of the table, you're in the middle of the action. As people talk across the table or in whatever direction, you're in the middle of it. You're seeing their faces, you're seeing their reactions, and you aren't watching it from the outside. And it makes all the difference in the world in terms of making an experience that is immersive.
Yeah, and I would imagine as a consumer, or excuse me, as a person in the meeting, you're probably paying more attention because you know that you're on camera. I don't know. Like I feel like I would be because I used to always hate that when I would do presentations and I see someone on their cell phone. I always wanted to call them out and be like, "Yo, you clearly not listening. You should leave." And as
Yeah.
I got older,
Yeah.
I would dismiss people, but
Oh, I love that. I'm right there with you. And likewise for the people on the remote end, because again, you don't want too much motion, you don't want unnecessary motion, you don't want blur. But because that stage area is dynamic and it's highlighting different people as they speak, it's much easier for you to stay engaged in the meeting because
yeah.
again, you're not watching the static view. So yeah, very powerful on both sides.
So now I want to talk to you about like developing the product because as with any product development, you typically need a lot of customer feedback. Was that always so like the features it has today, were those always the goal that you were saying that you and your team were thinking from the very beginning? It's like, hey, we're going to use multiple cameras, multiple mics, and we're going to use software to control what is displayed to the stage. Was that always the original intent, or did it only come about through like customer loops, feedback, things like that?
Well, it's funny. So, yes, and mostly, but not entirely. I will say the very first thought that we had when thinking of the idea was, hey, maybe people come and they put their cell phone into a gizmo on the table, and the gizmo, can do the same sort of AI robotics that the meeting owl does, but we'll use their phone and pivot it around. And we eliminated that idea for the two of the things we talked about. We didn't want the motion. Well, a few of the things we didn't want the motion blur, and we realized that you wouldn't be able to switch from one person to another fast enough. So we threw that out.
Hmm.
The next incarnation of the idea is very much what you see in the meeting owl, believe it or not. How did we get there? First thing was my personal experience. I was living it. I was customer zero, and so
Hmm.
it wasn't just like, hey, we want to start a company. What can we think of for an idea? What could make us a bunch of money? Like I was living that life for 2 years. So as customer zero, I had a lot of personal insight. Second thing I did was I called up about 20 friends that I knew that was back in 2014. I think I found 20 people that worked remotely, either part time or full time, or were in a situation like a friend of mine who was a college professor who would collaborate with people that were offsite a lot. And I interviewed all those people, not telling them what the product concept was, but asking them what their problems were. And that is a key axis for approaching product development from that product side is not coming to people and saying, hey, do you like my solution? Do you want to buy it? How much will you pay me for it? But like, tell me about your problems. Tell me what's not working for you in your life. And then you take that back and figure out, like, okay, well, how can we solve those problems? So I interviewed a bunch of friends and I found out that there was commonality. It seemed like I was not the only one with this problem. So we put all that together and yeah, the idea was very much the meeting owl that you see. I will say one thing that we didn't anticipate off the bat was that panoramic strip. So because of that experience of the computer swiveling around, I always imagined it was going to, just be those close-ups of the people, that stage area. And the first kind of, yeah, the first working prototype that we built used two web cameras. And you just plugged in two web cameras into the same computer and stuck them wherever you wanted to, and then the computer ran some software. And Max and I used that to sort of test out the initial concept with some real people. So we would do Google calls, but we would clip one camera to my computer screen and one camera to his computer screen, and we'd sit in the same room, maybe at 90-degree angles. And what people kept asking us, like almost without fail, was, "Hey, where are you guys? Like, where are you guys each located?" They assumed, even though we were coming in through that same video feed, they assumed that we were in different locations physically,
Yeah.
in part
Yeah.
because the backgrounds behind us weren't the same, and in part because they couldn't see us. So we learned from this is people want the context. They want that context of the room. They don't want disembodied heads or anything like that. And so that's when we added in that panoramic strip as a key feature.
I'm still laughing at that disembowel because you and I we're obviously doing a remote call, doing a podcast right now. I'm thinking to myself like, do I look like a floating head? Yeah, pretty much I do. Um, you know, we went. One of the things that's pretty interesting. So I want I'd love to understand this dynamic here. Is the use case, the intended use case for what you're doing is typically probably, and I'm making assumptions here. So if I'm wrong, certainly correct me. I would assume that most, like it's got to be a big company because a big company is going to be someone that has multiple conference rooms. Of course, a small company does as well. But like, so you have a direct consumer model. Like if I go online, I can purchase an Owl Pro. You also have possibly like, I guess you got to be like a channel partner or something like that. Cause like the big companies, they tend to buy through like suppliers. You know what I mean? Like they don't, like if I'm at I always say my wife's at Cisco. Of course, our sponsor Salesforce. Like if I want to upfit the conference rooms, I don't bring out my credit card. You know what I mean? I have to go through like supplier portal and all that stuff. Like, you worked at a big company. So immediately, what were you thinking? Like, how do I get this into the hands of the customer? Step one, get some feedback. That's fantastic. I think I have a working prototype. Now you got to sell it. You're going direct to consumer. Were you going right to the big companies right out the gate? Or did you say direct to consumer is less friction, less money, but it's a less friction? And then as we perfect it, then we'll go through the channel route.
Yeah. Once again, your intuition is spot on. So we did start with direct sales from our website, and then quickly moved into Amazon as just a great way to distribute the product, to a lot of people. And yeah, those tend to go out to smaller companies, but it's a great way to get started because you also know from those big company experiences, in order to get them to change over the technology in their conference room or anywhere else, that's a
Yeah.
big process, right? You're
Yeah.
talking months, if not years, of everybody taking a look at a thing, kicking the tires, thinking about it, getting distracted, coming back. So it's a big process. When we could sell direct to the consumer through our website or go through Amazon, people are able to just come and snap it up. And to your point, that's what we want. We want to get those owls in those early days out to those first users and get the feedback so that we can iterate. So, in your last question, I described all the things that we kind of knew about going into it. But of course, there's a million things that we've adjusted since
Yeah.
it's been out in the field, like tons of user feedback. Um, and we incorporate that in something I didn't mention earlier is the owl is it's got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So it is Wi-Fi enabled. It can be connected to your network. And with that, we're able to do over-the-air software updates,
There
provide you
you
with
go.
analytics, things like that. So we're always updating it all the time. So getting out to those customers as quick as possible is really powerful. Something else we did was the price point. We kept it under $1,000. And the thinking there was that we wanted people, even in bigger companies, to be able to expense it basically or use their own purchasing authority as the leader of a particular team or group. So we had people being able to buy it directly from us. And then because it is, because there's no calibration, no setup, you can just plop it down. People are able to bring it to conference rooms with them if it was just for their team at a bigger company, for example. So it was a great way to get started. Keeping that price in the spot where people could make that purchase quickly and easily was really valuable. And then, yeah, we do work with the channel now as well and kind of continue to move in that direction. Just to your point, because as a company, we need to grow. We need to get bigger and bigger companies using it, bigger and bigger deployments. But we've got like we cross the range, like I like to say, from avocado farmers to Fortune 100 companies and everything in between.
You just mentioned something that I didn't real. I mean, I figured, but I didn't want to put words in your mouth, which is the ability to do over the airwave software updates. So when you were first, because this is something that is true when we hear about many different scaling consumer product companies, software companies, obviously, even at enterprise, it's software has a special place where it, of course, can be updated over the airwaves. So how fast and how important was it to get those real like feedback loops so that you can deploy updates? Were you guys approaching it like, hey, let's gather all these requests, pull them together? Like, I would love to understand the process of how you were going to go put these together because everything we read about customers is like, yes, you got to listen to the customer, right? Number one, and then number two, they don't know what they want. So I'm sure you were getting feedback loops that you're like, I don't want to, I don't think we should do that. So
Yeah.
talk about how you were prioritizing. Talk about how you were, you know, deeming which was the most valuable, and of course, how fast you were rapidly deploying code to say like, "Hey, we're going to solve this bug. We're going to solve this bug. We're going to add this feature, whatever the case may be."
Yeah. So, in terms of figuring out what things would go in and when, which is always an ongoing process, it is a lot of the same stuff from those early days. It is collecting that feedback. So we send out, classic NPS survey that goes out to our customers sometime, actually a number of points in time after they've purchased. And one of the, in addition to asking them, how likely they are to recommend the product, which is the classic NPS question, we also ask them, hey, if you could wave a magic wand and have the owl do one thing that it doesn't do now, what would it be? And so that gives us a great database of what are people saying their pains are and how common are they? Is it just like a couple of people here and there, or is it, pretty pervasive or a pretty good group of people? And then the other thing is following up by actually talking to people. Because people just writing down a sentence or a sentence fragment, usually in a survey, is one
Yeah.
thing, but you really have to ask the questions behind the question. So, sometimes people would say, hey, I really wish that it had a battery. And okay, that's great. Are you going to be happy when you're running off of that battery and halfway through your meeting the thing dies
No.
and your
No.
call is disrupted? So really, what I want to do is like talk to you and find out, hey, why do you want to have a battery? And maybe that's really about portability, perhaps. And then it's like, okay, well, maybe a battery is something we could do, but maybe there's other things we could do. Maybe we could provide a carrying case. Maybe we could make the cabling lighter and more
Mm,
compact. I don't know.
yeah.
I'm just sort of making things up. But like, I think that's the importance of actually talking to people. It's good to have some quantitative data that tells you kind of what big trends are, but then I think it's really important to do a lot of qualitative interviewing to find out what are they really saying? What do they really mean? Okay, so then once we've got these things that we want to do, and I'll give you one example. We talked about that panorama and
Yeah.
how it wasn't part of the original design pre-launch. Max and I just never thought that the full 360 was something that mattered. Then we found out that it mattered. Then we get the product out there, and after a number of years of it being in the market, well, we've got enough people saying that they have in some environments where they don't want to show the whole room
Mm.
because maybe it's messy. There's a million reasons
Yeah.
and it's not everybody, but eventually we're like, you know what, this is a big enough group of people that we're going to make an optional switch that people can turn on and off in the product because we're not getting rid of it because there's an important reason we put it in there and most
Yeah.
of the people want it on, but there's a big enough bulk of people that like they have reasons that they want to be able to turn off. So that's the kind of thing where we would use that feedback to make decisions. So there's a case where feedback both made us put the panorama in and made us give people the option to take it out. Um,
Yeah.
so then, in terms of deploying things, this is actually pretty interesting, and it was something I kind of I don't know. I think I figured out over time. Didn't quite realize until we got into it. So you've got a connected device, and so that means that you can push software all the time.
Yep. Yep.
And we see this all the time in pure software, like web applications and things like that. They're changing like while you're using it. It might something might change.
Oh yeah.
And it took me a while to kind of fully get my head around this. Like, why can't, because I guess like the stepping back a moment, it's like, we can't do that for the meeting owl. And I'm like, why can't we do it at that kind of pace for the meeting owl? And it's because this is a piece of hardware that's on live video calls. And if we change something while you're in the middle of a meeting and it messes things up for you, that's catastrophic. In order to
If it's a sales call, people would freak out. Like the sales reps would go right to their VP of sales, right to IT, like, "Yo, get this camera out of here."
Exactly. And, we might likewise, because it is a piece of hardware that has to be, connected to the internet, somebody might unplug it and, put it back in the cabinet if they're the kind of team that's moving it from place to place. Or, maybe the network goes down for a moment. So now if I did a software update, I broke your owl in some way, and now it's not connected to the internet anymore for whatever number of reasons. Even if I made a fix, it can't get to the owl. And so that's very different than a cloud software that's
Yeah.
like purely in the cloud, like, your Google Docs or whatever. Or let's take Facebook, something that's even less critical. Facebook can make a change if
Oh
they
yeah.
break something about, how your news feed is displaying. one, it's not the end of the world, and two, 10 minutes later, you make another change to the software that fixes it, and you're guaranteed to get the change because the change isn't on your computer, it's in the cloud, and it can't be missed. But when you've got a physical piece of hardware that needs to be actively connected to the internet in order to receive updates, you have to be much, much more careful. So we kind of struck a balance between getting people new features as quick as we could, but doing really, really thorough testing to make sure that we never put out anything that was going to break the experience. And so, back when we were a smaller company, that meant updates were roughly quarterly. Now that we have more engineers, more SQA, bigger team, we're putting out updates once a month roughly.
That is awesome. The so I'm imagining, so for you guys, this the and share what you can, but I'm assuming Alan's got more products to make hybrid work better. The camera is a great product. It sounds like it's very interesting. I know there's more companies all the time now talking about, like you said, hybrid workforce. They might not be making everyone come back. There are, of course, certain businesses that can't afford to have people remote, so they never had the option. And I think getting a more connected experience is probably going to be important to them as well because they are competing for people that can't. You know what I mean? Every worker that
Yeah.
works at a job that can't do remote, they're of course going to be potentially tempted by someone who can. So getting any type of connection, connectivity is going to be big, and that's not going to change. For yourself, how do you envision your company maybe the next 5, 10 years? What other types of products? What do you think, or what problems need to be solved? I guess is a great way to say it. You don't have to tell me what products you're making, but would love to hear your
Well,
vision for what's going to happen.
yeah, I will start a little bit in the now term and the near term, and then
Yeah,
slide out to that future because there's some stuff I can talk about that I think is pretty cool. So that Wi-Fi, we talked about, hey, there's Wi-Fi on this device. You can connect to the internet. You can get over-the-air updates. That's cool. But there's something else that Wi-Fi lets you do. It lets you talk to other devices within the room. And so we have a new technology that we call Owl Connect. And Owl Connect lets you create an ecosystem of Owl Labs products in your conference room that all know about each other and all can work together. And this is we put out version 1.0 of this thing right now, so that's the right now. And I'll describe that a little bit, and then we can talk about where that goes. So for the right now, first thing you can do is you can take two Meeting Owl Pros and you can put them on a table in a conference room that's maybe a bit bigger. So maybe a conference room that's 10 people, 12 people, 14 people. And now you can plop these on the table wherever you want, but, generally along the middle of the table, spread out, and they will wirelessly connect together on their own private network. So they're not connected to the LAN, so you don't have to worry about any security concerns there. And they're their own private network, which means you don't have to worry about performance issues from collisions with other things that are going on the network. And now these two devices work as one. So you get the sort of the same kind of experience that a single meeting owl provides you, but over a bigger area. One of the
like a
owls,
Sonos. It's like
yeah,
Sonos. Yeah.
yeah. And one of the owls, you still plug into the host computer with USB. That one we call the primary. The other one automatically becomes the secondary, and they work together. So now not only do you have one 360 camera, 360 microphone array, 360 speaker, you've got two of them. And the way we see things is the ultimate experience will be when you have sensors that are close to all of the people. So now what we do is we put these together. They use all of that AI and robotics intelligence to figure out not just who to show, but what angle to show them at. So if I'm
Mm.
looking up towards the TV, it's going to switch to that owl that is closer to the TV. If I look across the table at a coworker that I'm having a conversation with, it's going to maybe switch to the other owl that's further down the table to give you that, again, make you as that remote attendee feel like you're in the middle of it all. And again, it's all automagical. Nothing that the user needs
Yeah,
to know how to
this
do.
is very much like the producer's box I just described, which is, if we were watching a live event or any live event, sporting, award show, music concert, whatever, there's somebody, it's a person that's choosing what you are going to show somebody. I mean,
Yeah,
that would be a unique experience because to the I would say this to the consumer of that experience, they would be none the wiser because they're used to that experience in the past. They've seen it. It's going to be entertaining, interactive, as you suggested. It's going to be way easier to pay attention. But
Yeah,
what will then happen is like if you don't have it, then it's like, well, why don't I get this? What's going on?
exactly.
It becomes the new standard. It becomes a new standard of consumption. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Like at first it's magical and then it becomes completely commonplace and expected. And this is the life of technology.
Yeah.
I think I forget if it was Rodney Brooks or someone else said, a robot is a robot until it works. And then it's just, then it's just an appliance.
Mark, man, it was awesome having you on the show.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, for all the folks listening, like, just focus back on that mission. We need to make hybrid meetings as natural and successful as in-person meetings. It has to happen.
No doubt about it. Now, Mark, before you go, though, it is time for the lightning round. The lightning round is brought to us by Salesforce Platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Mark, this is where we ask you questions outside of the realm of work so our audience can get to know you a little better. Are you ready?
I am ready. This sounds fun.
All right. So you got it. You're a builder. You were building vacuums. Now you're building cameras. What was the first thing you engineered or built?
All right. So this is actually an easy one, and I think a fun one, at least fun for me. So I'm going to take you all the way back to the 70s. So it starts with my father, who is a high school physics teacher, and in the late 70s, his school district bought some Commodore PETs, which I don't know if you remember that. It's a very old computer. The monitor was built into the bottom of the computer part. It had a tape deck, was the only drive it had. Anyway, they allowed teachers to check them out on the weekends and bring them home and use them. So my father
Yeah.
brought home the Commodore PET, and that is how I learned to spell my last name and my home address. I just kept typing it over and over again on that black and green screen. That wasn't exactly creating anything, but it leads up to where it did happen. So the next thing that happened was the school district got Apple II computers in the early 80s. And my father would bring those home for the kids, us kids to play around on. And I mean, I guess at that time, I was probably about 8 years old, and I started writing text adventures. So that was the very first thing I did was Apple Basic, start writing text adventures. The next thing I did was start making them graphical adventures. Nothing very fancy. It was like giant, blocky, like fixed images. And then the thing I remember doing after that, I remember because it was a total failure. I wanted to get into like some cool computer graphics, so not just like static blocks of color. I remember making this helicopter that would fly across the screen using sprites, but I didn't know about double buffering at the time, and so it flickered the whole time it was moving across the screen, and I could never figure out how to get it to not flicker. And fast forward to the future, the answer is the double buffer, but at 10 years old, I didn't know about that. Anyway, so software was the first thing I built.
Like your mind at 10, I mean, I was definitely still wondering which brands of glue tasted better. So I mean, your mind, you were operating on a different plane than me. How about what's more fun for you? Do you like building physical things or do you like building software?
So I love both, but physical is very important to me. It's something that, yeah, a little more background on me. So I actually went to undergraduate for mechanical engineering, even
Yeah.
though I was, teaching myself to program when I was a little kid. And it was only in the early 2000s when I ran into iRobot and robotics, became a real thing that I realized, oh, I really want to do software for physical things. The reason I didn't do software, undergrad was because, that was the mid 90s. The software then, it was like, it was very databases and behind the scenes things, maybe some rudimentary graphics, nothing, all that exciting. And it was all on the computer. As soon as I learned about robots, I was like, oh, you can write software that makes things move around in the real world. uh, that's when I realized where my passion was. It really is all about sensors and the software that lets them interpret the world and then do smart things.
I like that. Well, Mark, it was awesome having you on the show today. Thanks for sharing your journey, your epiphany, and the discovery and creation now of Owl Labs. I I'm bullish on the product. I definitely think that this is one of those things where it's like anything else. Maybe you don't think you need it, and then of course if you start using meetings that use it, then it's like, oh dang, that's way better than my other experiences.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us today on IT Visionaries.
Thanks very much. It was great.